You know what's more important than which exercise to do? It's when to do them. You can have the best exercise selection in the world, maximally biasing a given tissue, addressing your weaknesses, joint friendly, great progression potential, time proven, guaranteed to blow up that muscle, and fully approved by elite naturals. It could be S tier for hypertrophy and strength, but depending on what split you're running, if you're not factoring in your overall exercise selection, the splashover effect may lead to recovery problems. Because what you might not be accounting for is the indirect stimulation from suboptimal exercise placement, even if the exercise itself is optimal, which often comes in subtle ways. So in today's video, I want to open up your mind to the topic of muscular overlap and provide practical examples of exercises that you're probably already doing and might be confused about where to program them. But before we dive in, it should first be clear that these considerations are mainly a byproduct of split training, especially when there are minimal rest days. Because the truth is, the moment you introduce at least one off day between workouts, it significantly reduces muscular overlap, as well as systemic fatigue, which bleeds into subsequent sessions. Most of you probably shouldn't be lifting more than 4 times a week anyway. So in truth, if someone never wanted to suffer from muscular overlap, they just run full body workouts every 48 to 72 hours, like I used to promote a decade ago. Because then the entire body recovers together and there's zero possibility of future performance loss. You just need the gusto to perform these hard workouts and of course, emphasize muscle priority to achieve that split-like effect. This means the muscles most important to you will be sequenced at the very beginning of your workout and the least important muscles towards the end. And it doesn't matter if it's large or small. And through this, it's irrelevant which exercises you do because the whole body recovers as a connected unit. Exercise order then becomes more so about crafting your own aesthetic physique, not because you're worried about how your next workout will go. That's no longer a factor. So it's one less thing to worry about. When we talk about upper-lower programs, torso and limbs, or the more common push-pull legs and general body part splits, which most lifters follow, that's when you need to start thinking about the blending aspect of your exercise selection. Because I could talk about the benefits of full body training all day, but if you don't subscribe to it, like you don't want to train that way because it's hard to do or you simply don't enjoy it, then muscular overlap needs to be at the back of your mind at all times. It should become your first priority in intelligent split design. And this is especially true as you get stronger. If you don't, you'll become one of those forever intermediates. So you have to understand how exercises feed into each other. That's more important than what the actual exercises are. Let me start off by giving you a very simple example. The pullover. See, there's tremendous debate about what it actually hits, and obviously it depends how you're doing it, whether it's with dumbbells, cables, or the legendary pullover machine. Regardless, everyone asks, is the pullover a chest, lat, or long head of the triceps exercise? Or is it 2 out of the 3, or all 3? There are different biomechanical models you can follow. If you want to learn more, you can watch this full debate with N1 Education, but the general idea is that it kind of hits a little bit of everything. We just don't know which tissue is being biased the most. Some say it's teres major, others say that at the end range it's mostly costal pec, or that with cable pullovers it's more lats, and then you'll hear that if you bend your arms it's more triceps, while some influencers might argue the opposite, and that the absolute low balances out the lat stimulus since you're doing shoulder extension. So whatever you're biasing, which I don't have the answer to, it doesn't really matter anyway. Because at the end of the day, we can all agree that you have a compound exercise that when you get strong enough will affect all 3 of those muscles to some noticeable degree. Therefore, I can realistically only provide 2 options as to where you should place the pullover. It should either go on an upper body day or full body day. Because let's say you're running a push-pull legs program. If you do it on the push day because you believe your chest and triceps are being worked hardest, then on the pull day, maybe your lats will be slightly under-recovered for your lat bias work. Same with the teres major, which comes along for the ride and could potentially be biased depending on the movement. Or if you do it the other way around, let's say on back day, you do pullovers and then you go train triceps the following day on push, your long head might still be sore. Whereas if you just throw it on an upper body day, it doesn't matter. You can even end your workout with pullovers to further reduce fatigue. And if it's full body, even better, because now you can superset it with barbell squats. That's what the old school greats did. Pullovers were even treated as their own competition lift with very high strength standards to thicken the entire torso and build powerful triceps, as seen with guys like John McWilliams. Now just used as a pure isolation exercise. So it shouldn't be treated with a split mentality. It thickens the rib cage, grows your arms, and bulletproofs your shoulders. Also, if it's true that it hits the costal pecs in a specific way at the end range, and that's also what gets hit during pull-ups, then even if it's not hitting your lats, the chest itself could be affecting your pull-up performance when doing full range of motion, dead hangs. And that's something you will notice if you're strong. See, this is a crazy example that I brought up before, but if you're doing dead hang pull-ups and you annihilated your chest the day before, especially including pullovers, you might be weaker, particularly if you attempt a 1-rep max or light to train heavy. Because oftentimes you can get some jolts of power in the bottom using your pecs, just like you do at the bottom of a pullover. It's the same joint angles after all. I do this myself. I'll do 5 reps touch and go, very aggressive, and then the last 2 reps, I'll enter a dead hang and use my pecs to get some assistance out of the hole. So if you really killed your chest and also did pullovers, well, your vertical pressing performance might not be 100%. So that's why you might be wondering, why am I a tad bit weaker today? Well, now you know. It's also why street lifters who compete in weighted pull-ups and weighted dips separate their push and pull days by 48 hours to account for this overlap, including the long head involvement from dips, which can oddly affect your pull-ups. So they might run a legs push off, pull off repeat split. Basically the same as the Jordan Peters split, but with that off day swap for back instead of legs. And then there's the long head overlap. Obviously, nobody's gonna grow a huge long head doing weighted chin-ups, but you can still feel it if it's not recovered. Your strength won't be peaked. So in general, pullovers can be tricky to program in a split, but whatever you do, make sure you're not doing upper body back to back if pullovers were on the first day. So now that you're starting to get an idea about muscular overlap, this brings me on to the number one example I can give you. If you're doing rows, either on a pull day or an upper body day, you need to think about overlap on 2 fronts. The upper back and the lower back, especially if you're bent over. Both of which can potentially cause problems on your upcoming leg day. Sure, I've made videos saying that if you get super strong good mornings and you do bent over rows at the end of your workout, your reps in reserve for lower back won't be high and motor unit recruitment is still high. I stand by all of that, but is that going to create some muscle damage in your posterior chain? And can that hurt your squat and deadlift performance the very next day? Absolutely, since there's clear stimulation, and that's part of the benefit, right? But to maximize this benefit, you also have to ensure that the following day, you're not doing something that's heavily axially loaded, which is very common unless you're relying on specific machines or isolations. That's actually how you get into the rabbit hole of doing isolation-only programs. But otherwise, for normal exercise selection, doing bent over rows the day before can be concerning. So the first step is either to do chest supported rows or primarily vertical pulls, knowing you'll be hitting your spinal rectus tomorrow, or on leg day, you structure the training so that your back isn't involved at all or as much. Because it's not just that you're bending forward, you're also working your upper back on both days. So irrespective of being bent over versus chest supported, any row will hit the upper back hard. So let's say you're recruiting maximum motor units and stretching it out hard on your pull day, right? That means if you go do an RDL the next day, which also hits your upper back through that exact weighted stretch, and this time it's constant, and yes, some guys get yoked just off that alone, you're 100% gonna be weaker. How could you not be? In fact, that's a trade-off. And it's even worse if you're doing hinges the day after maximally biased upper back work. So if you were bent over, it's the lower back that's gonna give in. Whereas if you were chest supported, it's the upper back. They both carry a recovery cost when the back is loaded again while training legs. Same applies if you're doing a reverse SSB squat, a reverse SSB good morning, which hammers the upper back, a front squat, a Zercher squat, squatting with a compounding resistance where the top gets heavier, or rack pulls, you're getting upper back overload no matter what. Basically, even if you remove the lower back from the equation, if your upper back is fatigued, it will affect your axially loaded squats and hinges. Guaranteed. One common workaround is doing your hinges on the pull day and then making your leg day more quad bias without the upper back emphasis. So you could do belt squats instead. But besides changing your exercises, you can also modify your split to naturally auto-regulate muscular overlap. For example, in a typical push-pull leg setup, you can just flip the order to legs push-pull. Why? Because now you can go all out on your leg day with any exercise you want. You can do front squats and conventional deadlifts. It does not matter. Because when you hit push day the next day, there's going to be an overlap. The only potential issue could be if you're doing a standing overhead press or push press, which gets trickier if you're lifting beyond your body weight. But for most of you, this won't be a problem. So the upper back and kinetic transfer are still involved in a more passive way. But if you just sit down, now that blending issue is taken care of. So it's an easy fix. And of course, if you're running push-pull legs back to back, you really don't want every single day to be axially loaded. That's basic fatigue management. So you don't want to be doing squats and deadlifts on day 1, then a standing overhead press on day 2, and then bent over rows on day 3. You're never going to be maximally recovered. In that case, you're making zero considerations for overlap. That's on you. Now, continuing with back training, let's say you didn't even do an upper back bias row. Maybe did close grip tucked rows, or let's say lat bias pulls only, like you did iliac pull downs and Keenan flaps, full on isolation mode. Surely now you could do a squat or deadlift, right? Well, what if you also did shrugs? What if you did neck work? You think that's not going to affect your pulling? Of course it will. And then here's the other thing. Again, if you do legs on day 1 and then on day 2 you're planning to do a competition style bench, you're going to have all kinds of leg drive. So you're not going to be as strong on the bench. That's where Larson pressing comes into play. Or you could do a floor press or weighted dip. You understand? You make the substitution either through exercise autoregulation, so the next day if the muscle feels under-recovered, you make the swap, or you design a split that avoids the overlap altogether. But the biggest factor is the axial loading from legs and all the back work that feeds into that, which includes the majority of splits. That's why I like hybrid splits and why I started combining push-pull legs and upper-lower into one, which was my bodybuilding contest prep program in 2022-2023. And now, looking back and conceptualizing what it was push-pull legs, torso, and limbs. 5 days a week, that is the official template. And then towards the end, I dropped the arm day, in which I flipped the order. And by the way, it actually does go better in that order, where you begin the week with upper-lower. Because if you finish with push-pull, for example, remember, it's the exact same split with the exact same exercises. Then your compound movements will always be spaced 72 hours apart. Same twice-a-week frequency, but now with optimized recovery. So the ordering of your split becomes super important. So one little modification like that can make all the difference. Speaking of which, another method that works really well is doing your hinges on a modified legs push-pull split. Specifically on the pull day, essentially turning it into a density day. Or if you're doing an upper-lower off push-pull split, that now gives you the option of hitting the posterior chain twice a week without being a full-on leg day. And you can still add isolations afterward if you feel open to it. So you can open up your back workout with a rack pull and RDL, which is going to give you a massive stimulus for the entire back, all through weighted stretch. Then, if you decide to follow up with a bent over row, first of all, it's going to feel like a drop set, especially for lower back, so that's totally fine. And if you say, well, I'm going to do chest supported rows, it doesn't matter either way. Like, what I'm saying is, It doesn't matter what back exercises you do after, because you're training the entire back from top to bottom in that workout, and it will all recover together. Same thing like I mentioned before with the full body. What you do the next day isn't as important unless it's posterior chain again. So technically, you can still train legs the next day so long as it's quads only, like doing sissy squats and leg press. And by the way, squats don't work your hamstrings, okay? So the blending aspect is not a problem here. But overall, you can do a sissy squat and even choose a more manageable variation. You can even throw in leg curls at the end of a back day, because why not? Bend over rows hit your hamstrings too. Don't forget, it's like a mini RDL, especially with higher reps. So you gotta factor that overlap as well. But the main message here regarding push-pull legs is that legs push-pull is probably better for most of you, because it gives you the option to put your hinges on your pull day, giving you more posterior chain frequency without overlap coming into play. And of course, please make sure there's an off day after the pull. Don't just run legs push-pull to infinity. So you either reorganize the days, change some movements, or you include rest days. And that's where something like upper off, legs off repeat is so effective in an ABA, BAB format. All asynchronous splits reduce muscular overlap. They typically give you about 1.5 times frequency, which on paper guys don't like, but in practice, it leads to much better recovery, precisely because you're minimizing overlap. Another huge example is with shoulder training. Something that drives me absolutely crazy is when guys do heavy chest presses on day 1, then OHB on day 2. Why? Your anterior delts are already fried. You can realistically only handle isolations. If not, the bare minimum is spacing it out a day apart. Pressing back to back is one of the worst things you could do for long-term shoulder health and recovery. Also, you don't need to isolate your front delts either if it's a day after chest. So maybe just do lateral raises and rear delt flies on your bro day. And even when it comes to rear delts, that can technically be done on a back day for the simple reason that any row, especially with a 45-degree arm path, hits the rear delts super hard. That's what Doug Brignoli used to argue, that rows were more of a rear deltoid exercise than a back thickener. Because if you think about it logically, what people call the upper back is mostly just your traps. There's 3 divisions, which grow from protraction and retraction. It's independent of arm bending. So just like how the optimal guys are now doing Keenan flaps, either in the frontal or sagittal plane to hit the lats directly, that's kind of what you're doing with the upper back when you're rowing. You're bending your arm, yes, but you don't need to in order to retract your scapula. Otherwise, Kelso shrugs wouldn't even be a thing, right? Or let's say you were an amputee, or you did nether rows. Remember those? That would still build your upper back. So when you bend your arms, you're getting assistance from the elbow flexors, lats, and rear delts. And a lot of you think the rear delts are weak, but it's just because you never pushed them hard enough. Proof? Expander pull-up parts. You can do over 70 kilograms on those. Just saying. The Barbell Apparel summer sale is on, so right now you can buy 2 and get 1 free on all tops, shorts, and joggers. From our best-selling Havoc polos to our all-new Rapid Hybrid shorts. Designed in Vegas, everything's engineered for movement, coolness, and style that lasts. Barbell Apparel is for real lifters who train hard and like to move, and it's all been wearing my videos for over 2 years now. If you get too jacked or anything happens to your clothes, they'll be repaired or replaced, no questions asked. While you're at it, also check out my Leonidas ultralight tech tees and muscle tanks, as those are summer proof to the max. So if you want to support me directly, hit my link in the description box, and don't forget to leave a review. So going back to the shoulders, there are a lot of guys who will train chest and back on one day and then shoulders and arms next. That's doable if you're doing mostly compounds on day 1 and isolations on day 2. But doubling down on compounds has to be selective depending on what you're biasing. If you're somehow able to do an overhead press the very next day, then either you're very weak at chest pressing, or you're doing half reps, or I don't know what is going on, because there is no universe where I'd be able to train like that and not develop serious overuse problems or feel significantly weaker the next day. Like, how is it possible to do a heavy bench press, a compound movement that demolishes your chest and shoulders, and then do a vertical press the very next day. So let's say you did dumbbell pressing, which is a little bit less triceps dominant, flies, maybe some dips, full-on stretch work. How are you going to overhead press the next day? How? And how could you do front raises too? Are your anterior deltoids not sore? Do you not feel them when you overhead press? Not to mention, if you train this way, it still affects the recovery between sessions. Now you're only getting 48 hours of recovery for the next push. So now you're in a constant state of under recovery. You're not getting those 72 hours anymore, which increases the risk of shoulder problems. So if you're going to do a bro day the next day, just do lateral raises and rear delts. You can also throw in upright rows if you want to, but no vertical pressing compounds. And one more comment about the rear delts. Take the pull apart again. You know what works your triceps too, right? That final bit when you're extending your arm all the way, it's basically like doing a quarter rep tricep extension, almost like a tape press. It's where they have good leverage. And I'd imagine a similar effect happens doing a reverse pec deck. So if your triceps are fatigued or you're planning to train triceps the next day or even later in the same workout, just keep in mind that the pull apart is working them too. So again, exercises like that are best placed on an upper body day, just like the pullover. Okay, so whatever is like hybrid, that's where you want to place it. And rear delts should usually be paired with back, aka back and rear delts, like what Dorian Yates used to do. Or you can include them on your shoulder and arm day. Just be mindful, if you train back the day before and already hit your rear delts through rear delt bias row, you don't need to train them again. In that case, just end the chest and back day with some rear delt work, even if it defies the name of the split. You don't have to be rigid in that way. There's nothing wrong with isolating your delts at the end of a chest day. As for the bro day, just focus on side delts and arms and you're good to go. Speaking about the arms, you know how there's this whole talk about torso dominance, that if all you do is get super strong at compound lifts, you might end up with a spider physique? Well, first of all, it's not that you'll have stick arms, they just won't reach their maximum potential unless you properly isolate them. But here's the kicker. You can actually make your compound movements more arm biased, and that directly affects recovery. If you're doing any variation of a torso and limb split, and you throw in close grip bench with chains, weighted dips, which might work the long head, or weighted chin-ups, you're still working the biceps and triceps hard. Yes, it's not optimal by itself, but it's still a legit stimulus. The volume does contribute. So you need to be very careful about stacking arm bias compounds too close to your actual arm day. See, many coaches will say that if you want bigger arms, you should do arm bias compounds in addition to having a dedicated arm day, which makes sense. So you start doing closer grips on your presses, tucking the elbows, using ascending strength curves, throwing in board presses, upright dips, behind neck presses. And the back, you're doing more underhand work like chin-ups or Yates rows. You know, it's not bad advice, especially if you're someone who struggles to grow their arms. But here's the nuance that few of these guys are talking about. This only works if your arms are actually recovered when it's time to isolate them. If you've already worn out your elbows or bicep tendons with overloads, hard isolations, or lengthened bias work, your performance will suffer on arm day. Even on a 5-day bro split, where you think you're only hitting your arms once a week, arms tend to receive the most overlap out of any muscle group. Just look at Sam Solik, for example. His triceps unintentionally end up being a quarter of his weekly volume. So these so-called once-a-week bro splits aren't really once a week because of all the indirect overlap. Most bros don't even think about that. Maybe that's why they have such great arms. And maybe that's fine if you're only training muscle once a week, but even there, let's say you do shoulders on Thursday and arms on Friday. That's super common, right? Well, your triceps are almost guaranteed to be under-recovered if you did arm bias presses the day before. Your curls will be fine, since you might have done back day on Tuesday, but your push downs and extensions, not so much. And then you go blame the exercise when really your triceps got hit 3 times that week when it wasn't the intention. You didn't design your split to account for this. So this gets even worse with arm bias compounds like the overhead press with a close grip, or especially behind neck pressing, or anything with accommodating resistance. I promise that you're going to run into trouble on arm day. Even doing pull aparts on shoulder day can leave your triceps a teeny bit sore, which causes your extensions the following day to suffer. So what I'm saying is, make your compounds more biased towards the primary movers so that when you train your arms, they're more fresh. That is, if you know that you're not going to have a lot of rest days in between, which is kind of the opposite of what you've been told. You've been told to increase the proximity to failure for your arms on your compounds, and that when you isolate, just go hard. But if you're not recovering, then you're not getting the most out of those isolations. You can't go as hard. There's lingering fatigue and muscle damage. Again, this is very applicable to those who follow a torso and limb split. At the end of the week, you will feel that. So on the torso day, really stay true to the name. Make it more chest and more back, less triceps and biceps. Do that, and your arm day should go smoother. And another one, which is pretty obvious, is the forearms. But I don't think I have to say much about this. Those get worked quite frequently. And that's actually a good sign that you're under-recovered when your grip strength is low. That was one of my hacks back in the day. You get yourself a cheap set of grippers, and if you struggle to close them when it's time to do your main workout, then maybe it's a sign that you're not managing fatigue correctly. Now, in that case, if your grip is shot and you have to do some heavy deadlifts, well, just strap up. Stop being a purist, especially if you don't compete in powerlifting. Use straps whenever is reasonably applicable. Or for hinges, you can just do good mornings instead, since now you don't need your hands. So that's a good but very basic one. Anyway, I think I've given you enough examples. Now it's time to take a hard look at your exercise selection and ask yourself, where might you be under-recovering? Sometimes you're better off including or excluding certain movements on a given day, even if the placement feels unconventional, because you never know how that could affect your next workout. The synergy between exercises matters. And honestly, that's the biggest takeaway I want to leave you with today. This is not exaggeration. It's exactly how I design my splits for my clients and myself. I never overlook this because once you start minimizing overlap, everything changes for the better. You'll have fewer off days. You'll feel consistently stronger. Progressive overload improves. Joint pain goes away, whether it's your lower back, elbows, biceps tendons, or knees. You'll feel rejuvenated, and you might not need as many deloads anymore. But getting to that level means thinking strategically about exercise placement. So every time you add something to your program, ask, how is this going to affect my next workout, either tomorrow or 48 to 72 hours later? And will I be fully recovered, even from the indirect stimulation? And lastly, even if this targets just one muscle group, could it carry fatigue into a different lift later in the week? This goes beyond just saying, oh, I'll just do isolations, or I'll do machines only. Your exercises and training schedule need to be in sync. It's not about how hard you can push, it's about recovering from that stimulus. If you get that right, almost any split can be equally effective. But don't fall into the trap of thinking indirect stimulation is always better just because it increases frequency. Sometimes that extra frequency might not help you if your joints are wrecked, or your performance is inconsistent, or you're constantly under-recovered by a little bit. Bad workouts should be rare, especially if your lifestyle factors are dialed in. So this is how your average workouts improve. It's by reducing muscular overlap, not necessarily maximizing it, or by structuring your split in such a way that despite the overlap, you still come in more fresh. So you either make it work for you or you eliminate it altogether. That's pretty much it. So if you got any questions about this topic, or even better, you have examples of your own, please drop them down below. I would love to see how you're blending your exercises. Maybe you'll bring us something I missed. So please let me know, and I'll talk to you guys next time.